Good evening and welcome to the April 18th monthly work session of the Planning Committee of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Planning Commission. This meeting is officially called to order. And we will begin with introductions, starting with commissioners from my left. Shauna Neely, Planning Commission.
Rebecca Wilden, Planning Commission.
Andrew Blumenthal, Planning Commission.
Rick Winiker, Planning Commission.
My name is Kiba Samuel and I serve as chair of the Planning Committee. And now we'll introduce planning staff that's accompanying us tonight.
Alicia Osborne, Planning Staff.
Zanya Duhaney, Planning Staff.
Kathy Cornett, Planning Staff.
Bert Lynn, Mecklenburg County Park and Recreation.
Erin Henson, Planning Staff.
Caroline Fortney, City of Charlotte Real Estate.
Bethany Fritz, County Real Estate.
Elizabeth Kitts, County Real Estate.
Yes, Erin Shaw.
Well, this is not the welcome that's typically given to new commissioners. I was just telling Blumenthal, I don't think she's been sworn in yet, and she's probably not going to be joining us tonight. Okay,
No.
okay, thank you. Okay. Nice to meet you,
Nice to
however.
meet you.
So we will look forward to your participation in our next meeting with an S in May. But welcome this evening. Did we get everybody staff wise? Awesome. Thank you. Okay, and with that, our next agenda item is to make a motion to approve the minutes from our last month's meeting if there are no suggested edits or clarifications needed.
Winiker, motion to approve.
Wilden, second.
Motion by Winiker, second by Wilden. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It passes unanimous. Thank you so very much. And on to our next set of agenda items, which is our mandatory referrals. And I believe I would like to pull both for Charlotte Water, which is 12 and 13. I have a question that applies to both, and then I want to dig in a little bit on 13. So do we need to do a presentation for benefit of the public? Something.
Yeah, we do not have a Charlotte Water
Oh, I'm sorry.
representative here. Yeah, unfortunately. But we can try to answer any questions that you have, but otherwise we don't have a representative.
Okay, my questions were to apply to both 12 and 13. What's the lead time and perimeter for notification of start time of the projects? Also, I believe it was 13 that has a start date of April 2022. And either that's a typo or something possibly has happened out of order. The notes in 13, I believe that's the one that applies to Hidden Valley, said that this project would basically expand capacity, increase water pressure to the residents that particular set of pipes serves. But the PSI would increase by 20%, and that can be nominal. But I don't know what the current PSI is to be able to gauge that, and I just was curious about that. Was there an interruption of some sort that caused, or a partial blockage of water pressure, or is this? I don't know how to proceed with that line of questioning if there is no Charlotte Water representative present. So
I can always follow up with him on those questions and then report back to you all.
well, I believe, well, there's no delay on 12. And I wouldn't necessarily want to detrimentally delay 13 either. Or at least delay our recommendation on it, but because I believe both of these projects are slated, if that 2022 is a typo, they're slated to either begin land acquisition or the actual project this month.
Yeah, it looks like it had a start date of spring 2022 and the duration of the project's 24 months. But it looks like they didn't fully complete that section of the mandatory referral.
Because my questions are more process driven, street closures, lead time for notifications, what's the perimeter for notifications? It's been a minute that I can remember that we've heard from Charlotte Water in terms of mandatory referral. I was hopeful. That's not our Charlotte Water, no. that's not.
No,
Okay.
no.
I think that because my questions are more process-based and not necessarily of concern or hesitation for approval, I don't want to delay a recommendation. So with that, I will accept a motion.
I would actually, if you don't mind, I just want to pull, we did have somebody City of Charlotte Real Estate, correct? As far as number 19, the Reagan Drive mandatory referral. I don't anticipate additional comments, but would appreciate just a quick overview of what the city anticipates doing in the timeline with those two parcels.
Sorry. Erin Gillespie with the Corridors of Opportunity team at the City of Charlotte. So I can talk a little bit about this project. We'll be purchasing the hotel motel property. It will no longer be operated as a hotel once we acquire the property. Our plan is to relocate the few remaining extended stay guests who are there. There's just a handful. And then prepare the site for demolition, which all of that will start as soon as we close on the property later this week. And demolition should take place ideally in about 3 to 4 months, sometime in the summer. And we're also at the same time preparing an RFP for future development and working on the rezoning of the property. So the RFP will also be released along that same summer timeline. And our goal is to have that future development plan identified for the site by the end of this year.
No, I appreciate that. I think that it's just, there will be a lot of visibility around the project. And so to have that understanding is helpful, but I don't have any additional comments to add. Thank you.
Commissioner Winiker.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to the presentation letter from Park and Rec. In terms of these parcels, I don't have any to pull, but I just wanted to comment that it seems very exciting. These seem like some really neat opportunities and big chunks. So in good spots where we need parks. So I'm excited about these.
I'm sorry to go out of order. I thought you had something on 19. To follow up to the displacement comment, do we have any offline motion?
The planning committee reviewed mandatory referral reports 23-12, 23-13, 23-14, 23-15, 23-16, 23-17, 23-18 through 23/19 on April 18th, 2023, and have no additional comments for the submitting agency.
Blumenthal second.
Motion by Wilden, second by Blumenthal. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimous. Thank you. And we're so excited for this next portion of our agenda.
Always.
Bert, I can't tell you how many times I've said your name in the past 6 months. Thank you so very much. Bert is a very good friend of the commission, and we're always excited to hear what I anticipate as being fairly good news for Park and Rec and the update on the MEC playbook. This is information that we've been kind of itching to hear about, just so that we keep and focus and keep our magnifying glass kind of aligned with you guys. We know that there's been a ton of acquisitions being made thanks to some additional funding being provided by the county. And we were just kind of wondering, we're seeing them come through, right? The MRs, and we're seeing 10 acres, we're seeing 50 acres, we're seeing, these massive grabs, thank goodness. But how does that play into accomplishing what's in the MEC playbook? How is that addressing our gap areas? And where are we? What kind of progress have we made? And so we're excited to hear what you're presenting today. And with that, you have the floor.
Great, thank you. Thank you again for giving me the opportunity to come back. I'll do a little bit of overview. It'll be similar to the last time I was here in September. But because we've got another, 6 to 8 months of acquisitions under our belt, I'll be able to share exactly kind of where these acquisitions have taken place over the last 2.5 years or so, and how that kind of folds within the framework of what we're doing with MEC Playbook, which is our comprehensive park and recreation master plan. I got a handful of comments or questions, things that people wanted to know more about. And so if I don't address those, I think I've got all of those addressed kind of throughout the presentation, but if I don't, please feel free to ask any questions kind of as we go through. So as Mecklenburg County, we are the Park and Recreation Agency for both the city and the county. Those two departments merged in the early 90s. But we are not the only park and recreation department within the county, even though we serve the entire county. 5 of the 6 towns within the county also have their own park and recreation agencies. And so we work alongside those agencies, as well as a lot of different departments in all the municipalities kind of within the county. So in December of 2021, the Board of County Commissioners approved MEC Playbook, but we had been working on the document for close to 2.5 years. So some of the things that we'll talk about tonight, the frameworks and the approaches had been established, and we had already started to kind of act upon some of those, particularly from a land acquisition standpoint, even before the official approval and adoption of the plan. So as part of the plan, we conducted community engagement, steering committee and stakeholder meetings. We completed an inventory and assessment of every park, recreation center, greenway trail, nature preserve, and other recreation facility within our system. So we got a very clear idea of what we had in the system from an inventory standpoint and what condition it was in from an assessment standpoint. So MEC Playbook uses 4 guiding principles: commit to equity, evolve and grow, tell more stories, and move beyond boundaries, to develop comprehensive system-wide recommendations on how to enhance and improve recreation for all Mecklenburg County residents. Each principle has 4 to 5 goals and are supported by strategies. So these goals and strategies provide us clear direction on actions that we should take over the next 10 years moving forward. I do have a QR code here if you want a copy of MEC Playbook, and then I can send links to staff that they can share with you, not only on where our master plan document is, but other things that we have online for public engagement or just for public information. Next slide, please. So the principles, goals, and strategies included in MEC Playbook will be applied to key aspects of what we do at Park and Recreation. This document will guide our department's strategic business plan, directs our priorities from a capital improvement plan process, and will help us better engage with county residents. So some of the big things or the highlights kind of from the plan, from my perspective as the Capital Planning Division Director, have to do with our priorities in terms of investing in new facilities or reinvesting in existing facilities. It also helps direct the department on where we need more staff and where we add staff to enhance the offerings that we provide and maintain the facilities that we have, how we better engage with the public. But what we want to talk a little bit more about with you tonight are where we acquire land as we continue to grow the system within a county that is seeing a tremendous amount of growth. Next slide, please. So the land acquisition efforts that we've been working on over the last 2 years and will continue to work on kind of over the next 8 to 10 years fall kind of into 3 categories. So we'll be expanding access to public open space by acquiring land in identified gap areas. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in just a minute. It will help us improve access to our existing facilities, connecting one facility to another, and growing our system as the city and county continues to develop and grow. We've been more successful over the last several years in obtaining open space through rezoning and the development process, and believe we'll be even more successful when the new UDO comes into activation, I guess, in June of this year. And then third, in protecting our natural resources. When Mecklenburg County established a Park and Recreation department in the early 70s, the drive was to protect natural resources. So that's kind of what the roots of our county department were, whereas the city concentrated more on kind of traditional park and recreation. And then we took all of that over in 1992, I believe. So it's important, more important than ever, that we protect our high value natural resources, help maintain our tree canopy, and especially protect our water resources. One thing I'll add, as we were going through our consultant agency, Landscape and Planning, that oversaw the master plan process, shared that 75% of the land that we own within Park and Recreation are located along water bodies, which really isn't, it shouldn't be a surprise, but it just shows that we've had a focus on those natural resources for some time now. 75%. Yeah. Yeah, so related to MEC Playbook is the county's Environmental Stewardship Action Plan, which overlaps with a number of our efforts at Park and Recreation. And it also includes other agencies who oversee air and water resources. Our current county budget provided a large increase in land acquisition funding. So the fiscal year that we're in right now, we were provided $50 million for land acquisition compared to $20 million last year. Prior to that, our annual spending for all land acquisition was $6.6 million. So the completion of MEC Playbook and the Environmental Stewardship Action Plan, I think, had a lot to do with gaining support. Also, the amount of growth that we're seeing within the county. If we don't acquire that land now, there's not going to be land to acquire or natural resources to protect. Next slide, please.
This is
Yeah, sure.
What are the different, I'm not very smart. So, as you know, the different indicators, the dotted lines, the shaded areas. What?
Next slide. Here we go. But very good question.
Thank you.
Yes.
No, very good.
So land acquisition efforts over the next 10 years will focus on filling gaps within priority communities and areas of the county with limited to no nearby access to public open space. We'll work to account for growth by exploring ways to expand parkland through the development process and to make new connections between parks and nearby destinations like schools and libraries. So MEC Playbook aligns with the Environmental Stewardship Action Plan in several areas, including land acquisition. The 17 shaded areas that you see with dashed lines here are our identified gap areas. So these are the areas that we're first focusing in to acquire land to increase access to public open space. The orange shaded area here is what we call our priority communities. And this is how we apply equity in what we're doing and how we spend our money rather than just kind of talking about equity, right? So what we did is we identified communities with above average rates of youth and senior populations, renters, residents experiencing poverty, and communities of color. And where we have two or more of those factors overlapping, those fall within our priority communities. So as we move forward and reinvest in existing facilities or invest in new facilities, our top tier projects are within those priority communities. You can also see a number of the focus areas that we have aligned with those as well, but aren't necessarily only limited to those areas within the county. And so very simply, 1 through 17 is how we keep track of each of these gap areas. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about, click it one more time. I think there we go. Let's talk a little bit about the types of acquisitions that you guys have seen over the last several years. So first are the gap area acquisitions. So these are primarily for future parks. These are targeted acquisitions within the 17 areas across the county. Some of these properties happen to be on the market, which is actually fantastic because we know we have a willing seller at that point, and those acquisitions tend to take place in a much shorter period of time. But in some cases, our county staff reaches out to property owners. Those typically take a little bit longer. In some cases, more than 2 or 3 years. But it's still very strategic for us because it doesn't always happen that a piece of property is for sale in an area where we know we have a need for future park land. Each potential acquisition is evaluated with an initial biodiversity assessment that we do in-house with Park and Recreation staff. We also do kind of a high-level site analysis, and then we look at it from developability potential from a Park and Recreation standpoint. Next slide. Next are some of our greenway targets. And so most of our greenway system are along streams and creeks within the county. These acquisitions typically take a little bit longer because we're dealing with different groups. A lot of times we're dealing with HOA groups, and within the covenants of those HOA groups, there's a certain percentage, typically a higher percentage, somewhere between 70 and 85% of residents that have to sign off on the acquisition of that. So those are very long lead time acquisition efforts that we have. Also, with our greenways being linear, it's probably not surprising to you that we're often looking at acquiring many parcels rather than maybe one additional parcel from a park standpoint for better access. We have had very good success over the course of decades, I would say, in terms of acquiring land through the development process. Because of the limited developability of a lot of these lands, a lot of the lands are floodplain and floodway. But greenway trails are huge within Mecklenburg County, as they are kind of across the country. But every time we do large range public engagement and we ask the question, what types of amenities do you want to see more of? Greenway trails are always number one. They have been for over 20 years now. And then finally, our natural resource targets. So our initial nature preserve focus on watershed protection. So a lot of our larger nature preserves are located along the Catawba River or along the lakes that are fed by the Catawba River. We expanded the preserves based on the results of the Natural Heritage Survey in 1992. There aren't many targets left that haven't either been acquired for nature preserve or acquired and developed at this point, given the age of that study. So our current acquisition efforts focus on expanding protection to our existing nature preserves or protecting other undeveloped areas of the county. And a lot of the work that we do here overlaps with the work that city staff do from a tree canopy protection standpoint. And so if we see a piece of property that we're interested in, but following our biodiversity assessment, it doesn't meet the criteria that we think that it needs to from a natural resources standpoint, we'll share that information with city staff from for potential acquisition for tree canopy protection. There have only been a couple of those over the last couple of years. More times than not, we've got a pretty good target of what we're looking to go and acquire from a natural resources standpoint. But we have had some success with that over the last several years. So let's talk a little bit about what we've been up to over the last couple of years. In fiscal, well, let's look at the map first. So what you'll see here is kind of by fiscal year where we've made our acquisitions. So the dark blue are our fiscal year 2021 acquisitions. The burgundy are fiscal year 22, and the purple are FY23, which we're still in process in FY23. We've got another 3 months or so within this fiscal year. Total acreage in FY21 was 308, followed by 295 in 2022. And to date this year, we've closed on 255 acres. If you go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about kind of where we are year to date right now. And this kind of starts to paint the broader picture of how the increased funding has really impacted what we've been able to do. So we've closed on just over 255 acres of land, but we've got another 306 acres under contract now because we've got that larger purse to go in and make offers to. And then beyond that, another 295 acres of land that we've made offers to. So that's a total of 857.2 acres that we've got in play right now. That adds up from in some cases appraisal, in some cases a tax value to right around $75 million. And so this is ultimately what we've been working toward over the last couple of years. We wanted to make sure that we had enough targets that we could take down with the money that we had, but knowing the length of time that some of these acquisitions take, we wanted to have a backlog of work for the following fiscal years. So we're not just starting and stopping and starting and stopping. We wouldn't be able to build momentum in that way. I did want to point out some of the additional gold dots that we've included on here are some of those properties or those areas where we've got properties under contract right now. And then you can really start to see how some of this kind of relates to the focus areas in terms of our gap areas and land acquisition. If you go to the next slide. So some of these focus areas we've pretty much closed out. We've had great success in area 2, 7, 8, 14, and 17. And then we're starting to redouble our efforts in particularly those gap areas that are within priority communities. So those include areas 4, 5, 6, 10, and 15. Where we've gone in and acquired that land, those are the areas of our future parks. And so our next step from a planning standpoint will be to go in and start doing high-level planning and feasibility studies on those properties to start to understand how the land would like to be developed so that it's not overdeveloped and we're not doing things beyond what we need to do. You know, if we think we've got to go in and build 20-foot high retaining walls, maybe the scope that we're trying to build there is not appropriate for the site. And so we want to work with the natural resources as much as we can, but also identify places where we're able to fulfill certain types of amenities, playing fields, pickleball courts, dog parks, all the fun things that we get to do at Park and Recreation. Next slide. Some of the development requests that we've been doing over the last several years, or in Greenway's case, over many decades, acquiring land through the development process for future Greenway trails. In most cases, you know, we'll ask for 100-foot wide easement or fee simple property. It's really, we leave it up to the developer or the property owner to tell us what they're comfortable with there. We have had more success over the last 2.5 years in requesting and obtaining land for future parks through the donation process. Now, those are not required, but we've had some success. Typically, we're targeting larger developments over 20 acres. And in a 20-acre site, we would ask for about 5% of that land area, which would be about a 1-acre park. We have a few parks under 1 acre, but not many. So we think about it from a local park standpoint. If you want to go in and add what we have in a standard local park, a park shelter, playground, some outdoor fitness, and a loop trail, you need a site of about 1 acre or more in order to go in and start to look at that program. Next slide. So that's all that I had, but I am happy to answer any questions you have or share any other information that you might want.
I knew that we would hear the good in this presentation. I anticipated that your presentation would spark some questions. I think I've written a book, so I'm going to go last. And about 3 minutes in, I regretted this presentation today because I think that the whole commission needs to hear it. We all root for Park and Rec in any way that we can get it. And I know there's some other commissioners who are not on the planning committee who would be interested in this presentation. So if we could have this to distribute, that would be awesome. So hands raised. I know Commissioner Winiger. We're going to start with you.
Thank you. Bert, thanks so much for this project. And of course, well, Bert knows I just wanted to share, this is a dramatic reversal from where we were back in 2017, 2018 in terms of the community. And thanks to the leadership of a lot of county commissioners and a lot of strong voices all around the community, that's where this additional funding came. And it's very encouraging to hear that it's still moving in that direction. I also wanted to say that I think that in terms of park access, and sometimes it's called an amenity, and it's not really, I would argue it's not an amenity. I would argue it's a public resource that everyone needs to be able to access. So for every person, is there a place where you can go and see a tree? Is there a place where you can take a kid and go on a swing set? And that's, I would argue, as important as water, sewer, roads, transportation, things like that. So in terms of checklists and stuff that you guys have been working on and talking about, I definitely am curious to know how much more, obviously transportation is huge, right, in terms of any planning. And right now, as we're going through these workshops with the public in public engagement on, the future of Charlotte, this is an integral part of that. And I mean, it needs to go like this. And so I think it's really great that we're getting a lot more specific feedback from Park and Rec, and I appreciate that. And I'm very much hopeful, whatever can be done, from a community perspective to encourage the two organs that sometimes don't always work together, but I know on a staff level, you guys work together great from everything I've picked up on. But definitely anything we need to do to encourage, because we pay taxes to the county, pay taxes to the city, but we need clean water. We need a place to go. We need a place to take our kids, a place to take our grandparents. And, and everyone does, not just a few privileged neighborhoods and things like that. Bert, thank you very much for all that you've done.
Thanks.
And I look forward to, I'm going to be reading this tonight. So hopefully someone can send it to me.
Commissioner Wilden.
Thank you so much. This is wonderful. And like, I definitely think the whole commission needs to hear this. I had maybe 3 questions. It might be just 2. I don't know. Are the focus areas ranked or are they just numbered for funsies?
No, they're just, we just number them. So that helps us keep track of where we are and what we need to refer to. And they're not fixed in space.
Mhm.
And we're not limiting the acquisitions that we make only to those areas.
Mhm.
However, we're focusing primarily on those areas. We don't want to put down any opportunities that we have in other areas that don't have park access. These were selected because of other factors in terms of, existing density, particularly on the east side. It's traditionally been the most densely developed part of the city, but very poor in terms of access to parks. But we don't want to forego an opportunity if a property comes online that makes a lot of sense from a park and recreation standpoint.
And then a comment and then my last question. I really love that one of your kind of like buckets is limited access to a car. I think that's incredibly important just because I think number 1, getting outside improves all health outcomes, but also number 2, one of the big things in the comprehensive plan is like the 15-minute neighborhood. And so transit and walkability and bikeability and transit oriented development like really plays into that. So like pocket parks and that fun stuff. And so my last question is, how can the Planning Commission as a whole be helpful in working for parks and major rezonings that might come through from y'all?
So I would say if you've got questions in terms of where the closest park or recreation facility is, if you don't see anything, if you're not aware of anything, reach out. We're happy to help in any way that we can. We are now involved in a lot of the pre-submittal meetings for rezonings and subdivision reviews. And then we're spending, we've got time each week where we go through and look at those and make comments and everything. So I'd say we've stepped up our game a bit in terms of how much time we're spending in doing that. But anytime you have any question, or if you see one and you don't see an ask and you're like, well, why isn't there an ask here? Again, reach out and we'd be happy to share that information.
Awesome. Thank you.
Just a couple of quick things. One, thank you again for your time.
Mhm.
This is something we talked about in the past, and to Becca's point, I appreciate the increased engagement in the rezoning process, because again, as a part of these developments, there is often a lot of opportunity for intentional open space, right? I know we talked about that in the past, not just setting aside tree save, but programming it, being active and trying to consolidate it in a way that's actually useful for you. And I think that the best way to do that is to get involved, before shovels ever go on the ground.
Yep.
So I think that's fantastic. Something else that Becca mentioned was pocket parks, and I know you'd mentioned kind of limited usefulness for parks under an acre. But as we look at parts of town that are starting to grow more dense, you know, the south ends and other neighborhoods that are following, maybe not that exact trend, but in that direction. Have you started looking at the pocket parks, the smaller parcels that can still be programmed, even if there aren't larger walking trails, but it could be just a playground and something small, right?
Yeah, definitely we have. The approach that we've taken over the last couple of years with the larger facilities, we're still looking at every rezoning or every development plan that comes in with a keen eye. And one of the reasons that one of the guiding principles for MEC Playbook was evolve and grow is exactly what you said. It's not only about the growth of development within the city and the county as a whole, but it's the type. And so moving forward, there's going to be much more dense development, which means there's going to be a lot less open space, which means that the parks play an even more vital role in providing that outdoor kind of recreation area. Whether it is a traditional park with, you know, trees and playgrounds and swings and that, or if it's just a small kind of plaza space that may have a couple of trees and a small playground, but is within a 10 or 15-minute walk of where residents live.
Right. I appreciate that. I mean, I'd love for us to have a central park, like a la Queens Park, what they've talked about, right? But in the meantime, and until Norfolk Southern decides they want to play ball, I think it's a more smaller parks approach, right? Because that way the accessibility is there in these denser areas. And I think you echoed that, which is great. The only other thing I noticed in the mandatory referrals that there was actually a donation this week or this month. How frequent is that? And kind of what is I'm not saying it necessarily needs to be encouraged because it's not like a traditional nonprofit land conservancy or something, right? But how frequent is that, and kind of what does that process look like?
I think most of those donations typically come through the development process. This was one where it was a remnant piece of property from a developer who had completed a project years ago. And realized it's an area where there's a main creek and a tributary. And I think like over 90% of the property is impacted by a floodplain. And it happens to be adjacent to a park that's already in our system that abuts an elementary school. And so they saw the value from a resource protection standpoint and the limitation that it had from a development standpoint.
Got it. And then, the last question, this one's quick. As far as the budget, that annual budget for your fiscal year, that's for both acquisition and development, correct?
That is just acquisition.
Only acquisition.
Yes. Yeah. So the development for what we do is typically funded through our capital improvement plan,
Okay.
which is done or has been done traditionally in 5-year increments.
Okay.
So we're in the final year of our current capital improvement plan. And the board is currently considering projects for our next 5 years of development.
Okay.
We have had some one-off funding, thanks to advocacy of our Park and Recreation Commission and some of the commissioners that's come through. We got, I think, a total of about $12 million in ARPA funding, American Rescue Plan Act funding, toward park facilities and Wi-Fi, expanding Wi-Fi at recreation centers and within some neighborhood parks. And those were within some of our key areas, our priority communities. There was also been some funding as part of a broader equity initiative, and that is funding improvements to 10 existing parks. One of which we just had a celebration for a couple of weeks ago at Enderley Park. Just on the west side of town. If you haven't been by there, if you're not familiar with the park, I would invite you to go and check it out. Every time I drive by now, there are at least several people kind of within the park, like in the middle of a weekday. When we go on the weekend, we've got folks doing lots of different things within the park. So it's really starting to what MEC Playbook has allowed us to do is take advantage of when we get funding kind of outside of that typical traditional kind of funding model and apply it fairly quickly and directly.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Couple of quick follow-up questions about that, actually. How well is the county working with Catawba Lands in terms of some of their land acquisition? I know in the past, they've acquired some key parcels that have been very helpful, but is it still happening or?
It is, yeah. And we're also working with the Davidson Land Trust as well
Mhm.
on a few key acquisitions in that area. And potentially in putting some conservation easements on properties that we already own within the Davidson area. With the Catawba Lands Conservancy, we continue to work with them, both from a greenway standpoint with the not Cross Charlotte Trail, City with the Cross Charlotte Trail, the Carolina Thread Trail, but also on some properties that they have acquired over the years and already have conservation easements on, which kind of align with our nature preserves.
You had mentioned doing some preservation projects with the Charlotte Arborist, or you would for tree canopy preservation. Was that the tree save money, or do you know where that funding came from?
So that we were, from a county standpoint, we were using our county dollars
Got it.
for those. And then if it was not a piece of property that we were going to be able to acquire, we saw great value in, we would share that with city staff,
Mm.
and then they would use the tree save dollars to go and acquire that land.
I don't know how much there is like right now, for instance, with the tree save dollars, but it seems to me that some of the natural resources goals that the county has would be in line with the spirit of why the tree save dollars were in line. Are you aware of anything that can be done to maybe encourage more of that being shared with the county for this land acquisition or city led? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm high enough.
I understand. I'm just talking out loud then.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, but
absolutely.
I'll figure that out and I think that would be an interesting thing to encourage.
Yeah, I'm not gonna theorize on spending city dollars.
And I had another real question, but I can't remember. And Bert, I'll just reach out to you separately if I have a question. Really appreciate the presentation.
Yep.
Looking forward to looking at it in more detail.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I'm all over the place. I'm sorry. I'm all over the place in terms of my questions. Some of them I had prepared before this presentation, so I'm just gonna rattle them off in no particular order. What's your win percentage for bids versus acquisitions? What's the ratio? Do you know? Let's just keep it within the last 24 months.
I don't know that.
Okay.
But I could reach out to Jacqueline McNeil.
Just curious. We often hear, not often anymore.
Yeah.
We don't hear about the CMS Park and Rec battle for land.
Right.
That warms my heart.
Yeah.
We just had Mr. Lucaria present to commission on the CMS's comprehensive capital plan. They have a lot of projects that are either going to be torn down, rebuilt, replaced, relocated. How describe the partnership there? Because I think Mr. Lucaria even alluded to the fact that there could be some partnerships there, some potential swap opportunities. How involved was Park and Rec in the development of their plan?
So we weren't necessarily involved in the development of their capital improvement plan, but we have a monthly coordination meeting with Mr. Lucaria and other CMS staff, looking long-term at where we're looking to acquire land, where we have current projects or upcoming projects, particularly those where there's land acquisition that's involved. So that's probably why there's fewer heads butting in terms of like competition for that. But also where our priorities align. If there is a school that is high on the priority list for replacement or renovation from CMS's standpoint, that happens to align with a park in the area or in some cases adjacent, then we may think about how we do those two separate projects as one larger project, knowing how CMS typically likes to approach a school replacement on the same property. If there's a park nearby, it may be that that park is, from a short-term standpoint, impacted by the development of the new school. And then when the older school is demolished, new park amenities are built in that location. And you think about it a little bit more holistically.
Yeah.
Like you would if you controlled everything within that development.
I'm glad to see those opportunities are being taken advantage of. Excuse me. Yeah, I think it's just Blumenthal and I who have served on a rezoning committee or zoning committee. So we've seen the evolution of park and rec involvement and the increase. It's more frequent. It's a lot earlier in the process. So that also warms my heart. But I wonder, is that because of reallocation of resources for park and rec? Is that due to additional funding? Like, how did your bandwidth expand to allow for that? Was there temporary funding? And I'm trying to discover the blueprint to give to CFD.
So a few things. I've been in my role for a little more than 4 years. And so part of what I was able to do in coming in was to look at how we approach things with fresh eyes. And so we reallocated or kind of refocused in certain key areas. At the same time, 2.5 years ago now, we were provided 2 additional planner positions. Well, a senior planner position and a planner position. And so we were able to staff up and increase our bandwidth to go and do more coordination and more hands-on review of things like rezonings, of coordination with the City Department of Transportation, with NCDOT, with CMS, with the other towns and other kind of municipal agencies to try to better align. And I think we're starting to see those those efforts pay dividends in, like, our plans are starting to kind of work together.
Yeah.
So now the big hurdle is to get the funding to work together, and we're still working on that. We had a work session with CDOT, with Ed McKinney and his team probably 2 months ago. And that was one of the questions that we were trying to answer, like, how far out do we have to plan? And it's at least 5, if not 10 years out that we feel like we're going to have to plan things so we can get the funding to align in the different models that we have within the different departments.
That feeds right into my next question. Does the MEC playbook have a sunset? Or does it have a specific time period in which it is updated, revisited, et cetera?
Yeah, so our goal is for it to be a 10-year plan with a 5-year update. So that would mean within the next couple of years, we're going to be looking to update. And that would be the time where we would go in and look at the gap areas from a land acquisition standpoint and sunset some of those and maybe add more to those. Or rather than being larger areas, they might start to get a little bit more refined and where we're looking to focus.
You're helping me out here. Next question. Speaking of gap areas, you touched on how you're kind of working around. My question was, what's the workaround for gap areas? One of those ways is to dig in with developers and figure out how to kind of partner there. But undoubtedly, some of these gap areas are going to be that way for the next decade or two, just because of its current condition and land uses around it. I will study the MEC playbook because this probably addresses this question. But when you say gap area, are you delineating a natural resource gap versus a rec gap versus an open space gap? Is it delineated in that fashion? Or is it just land acquisition based?
Yeah. So it's primarily land acquisition based from a park perspective. Natural resources occur where they are. So the gap areas don't necessarily respond to that. However, we have made some strategic acquisitions of properties that have turned into new nature preserves. Or when we're doing the initial biodiversity assessment, we've identified something that may not be endangered, but we may want to protect because it's a rare plant community or something within the area. So it has more to do with park space. But where we're able to align, we do. So some of the properties that were on the agenda today they serve multiple purposes. There's one on DeArmond Road that serves a greenway purpose, but a park purpose as well.
Okay.
And so we're looking at things from a gap standpoint, but also from a more holistic standpoint in everything that we do at Park and Rec. And where we can identify those acquisition targets that meet like multiple goals, those are fantastic. Those are ones that we try to prioritize if
I
possible.
certainly agree. Can we go back to, I think it's the last map that you had. Just one point of criticism. I hope I'm not alone, but I'm a bit sight challenged. So to read the legend it's a little bit of a stretch for me,
Sure.
but so I live in a pizza slice between 1677 and 485. And I don't see any funny colors or circles or yellow dots. And I'm wondering, no, because this is Met County funded, never mind. I was gonna ask about unincorporated areas because I feel neglected, Bert. My house is behind a golf course, but that's the only open space. I can't walk to a park. I don't know when I'll be able to. I think Firestone is the closest little neighborhood
Most
pocket
likely.
part, but I would not dare cross Peachtree to get there. Is there anything planned in there? I know we've got. I'm trying to connect some dots because we've got 485, the land that borders 485 right behind Miranda. That's some brownfield, that's some creek area there. And I think some of that even may belong to Park and Rec.
Yeah,
So I
there's-
think that's,
A former private golf course there that we acquired several years ago on Oakdale Road. It's Oak Hills. It was called Oak Hills Golf Course. And then there was remnant property that NCDOT purchased when they were planning for 485 that we have that's along Long Creek. So it's a future greenway corridor and Shuffletown Park. There are some areas in the area that you're talking about that we have offers on properties. I mentioned earlier that we focus on these areas, but we don't restrict ourselves from looking outside of these areas.
Okay.
Particularly when opportunities come. There was a piece of property that we were notified was going to be on the market about a year ago. We spoke with the owners. They moved forward with a private developer. That deal has fallen through. And so now we're going and
Back to
working
the
with that
table.
property owner again, because we've got the opportunity. And we know, what we have and where we have it and where we don't have it. And that's one of the areas that I would anticipate when we start to go in and look at how we revise our focus areas would probably be an area that we'd look at.
good news. I knew it would be. Alicia. Actually, no, first, Commissioner Winiker mentioned that you mentioned area planning in a roundabout way, that how can we ensure the best outcomes to this regard as we're planning in these different geographies. Bert is there. He's in the room in these sessions, or he has a representative there. But one of the things that I noticed when I attended the first set of workshops is or at least in this particular geography, was that the residents were kind of shy. And so I kind of played a role of asking prompting questions to get them to pull out. Okay, real, like, what do you want? Like, this is your opportunity to say, I want this area to look like this, or I envision, North Lake Mall evolving into this. So this is where you guys play a part, because you can be the middle ground. You can be the conversation starters in an environment like that. So I do encourage you guys to be in the room. Next set of workshops start on today, actually.
Yeah.
But in order to be that middleman, you would have had to attend the training last Thursday. Keep me straight, Kathy. But you can still participate as a community member if you did not have a chance to do that. So it's necessary. This is foreign to a lot of people, but for us, this has become kind of our second language, right? So we can't dictate what we want these areas to look like. That is for the community to kind of help decide, but to help them or at least be able to ask those prompting questions to get them to really bring out their vision. I was glad to have participated in that forum, and I think it was kind of effective. So if nothing else, that's how we all can play a part. And then Alicia, I think my last note is actually for you. We just heard a lot for the MEC playbook and how we're getting these major wins and seeing the progression of the goals. Can you speak to how the MEC playbook kind of, I got my air quotes up, talks to the comp plan and how the comp plan may be updated around the same time as MEC playbook probably would update?
For all smiling. We've been in lockstep before the comp plan, actually, and how we plan for providing green space and greenways and trails for our community. The good thing about the partnership with the county, we too understand when we talk to the community, they don't see a dividing line between who does what. And so how we do our work behind the scenes the same way. So Bert and Katie are always in the room. For both projects, we're in the room with them as well. So that we have had coordinating teams throughout the development of comp plan and MEC playbook. So we look at MEC playbook, it speaks to the same tenets that we have in comp plan around equity, around equitable mobility, equitable safe mobility, around the environment. It talks about providing access to these spaces, no matter where you are, or who you are. And so, what this process that we're embarking on now, it takes us from a high level conceptual discussion around how all the pieces work together, but making sure that we connect the dots when the development process. And so we've always kind of been on the table, eating the same meals.
Well, and the timing worked out.
Yeah.
The timing worked out great because the city was doing the comp plan. We were doing our master plan. There was a strategic mobility plan that was going on at the same time. And so, and UDO. And so it's been great to be a part of the process. It's further helped us align what needs to happen. When somebody, goes and uses a park or trail, they don't know if it's city or county or what. I was in New York City a few weeks ago, and I didn't know who did what. That's what we have to do as staff, is go in and kind of figure out how to make it as seamless as possible. And it worked out very, very well from a high level planning standpoint over the last several years.
I'm looking for a word. It's not a trifecta because you mentioned strategic mobility plan, comp plan, MEC playbook. You name like, it's a pin. Yeah, okay, we'll go with Winokur's comment.
A regulatory tool that helps us.
UDO, that's right.
UDO.
Penta. Making up stuff. This is when I'm delirious. Any other comments, questions for, oh, yes, Commissioner Whitaker.
Real briefly, we talked a few months ago about how in the mapping in MEC playbook, would describe access, community access to different kinds of things. And I haven't gone back and spent much time looking at. I don't know if any changes have happened, but I feel like there is some accuracy missing in terms of that. And I just obviously, since we're all in the same room, it'll be important, I think, to have a better, because with the transportation hurdles, there's some areas that just are inaccessible.
Sure. I think you were talking about the community reports from, I think that was a.
Yeah, one of the layers
Right,
on
right.
the map. Yeah.
And so since that time, it was after our first workshop, Bert, Katie, and our staff have been communicating about where some of those gaps are. And a lot of times it's because the data hasn't been updated on GIS yet, but we're aware and we're in communication about that, getting that all updated.
Absolutely. And if you get to a point where you feel like, hey, you know what, we fixed it, I'd be very curious
Okay.
to know that.
Okay,
I think
great.
everyone would. It would be, because it's a helpful tool for the community. Yeah.
Well, Bert, we asked you to deliver and you certainly did that. So many, many, many thanks for spending time with us this evening. Final question for you. What can we do for you?
You got money? You guys got? No, I'm kidding. No.
I know about
No,
$2.
I think your continued support and, you guys look at things from a different angle than we do. And anytime something doesn't look quite right, or you've got a question, let us know. I feel like we do a fairly good job and we catch a lot, but we don't catch everything. And so if there's something that you see that doesn't look quite right, please let us know. And we'll share what we know about it and share kind of how we approached it or if we missed it. So.
Well, I'm glad as you put it, that you're beginning to see, the dividends show up on the ground for your wins. And I don't know now what to tell Chief Johnson, but I wish that he was able to replicate what Park and Rec has been granted in terms of additional resources. But thank you again. And let us know, please, also, if there's anything that you think of after this meeting that we can help accelerate Park and Rec's goals.
Certainly. Thank you.
Thank you so much. With that, is there anybody have anything else?
I had a quick update on.
Oh, yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
Community area planning. I don't have any slides. I'll
I'm
just
so
do a verbal update. So last month, we provided an overview of what the workshops look like and kind of explained how they're occurring and the training. As a reminder, they're designed to collect feedback, so we're not actually making place type changes at the tables. But we're talking about potential place refinements. That's what we're focusing on. Projects and programs do come up as part of those conversations, and that's great because that's going to help us prepare for the next phase of workshops, which focuses on that information. And the workshop discussions use a mix of value-based and map-based questions. So the good thing is we've got one set of workshops under our belt and started the second set today. And we do really find that the format and the questions we're asking and the materials are really resonating with folks, and that is really helping. So we're pleased with that. West Middle was our first workshop. The virtual session was March 28th. Then there were 2 in-person sessions on the 30th and then April 2nd. And those in-person sessions were at the Tuckasegee Recreation Center. The participation for that particular set was lower than we would hope, but the conversations were very robust. And after the Thursday night session, a couple of folks that actually came to the meeting actually took flyers and distributed them around their neighborhood and community and got some folks to come on Saturday, which was great. A lot of the conversations are confirming the comprehensive plan priorities, just kind of a good check for us. And also talking about how to improve access and mitigate impacts and things like that. And from that set, those participants received a thank you follow-up email that also encouraged them to get others to participate either in the workshops or in one of the other library hours that we have, or the online opportunities that we have as well. This week, we've started West Inner. So the virtual session was this morning into after lunch. And we had about 39 participants for that one. About 11 were staff, but that, again, includes not just our staff, but Park and Rec staff and others. So it's great that they're able to hear the conversations as well. The in-person sessions are on Thursday, the 20th from 4 to 7, and Saturday, the 22nd from 9 to 12. And those are at the Stratford Richardson Y on West Boulevard. And again, your call to action is, as Kiva mentioned, to attend, to promote, to get the word out and help us with that. And if you are interested in facilitating a table or helping staff to facilitate, there is that training session, and our staff does it every time too. So it's the Thursday prior to the Tuesday start of that week of meetings. So they alternate weeks. This was an anomaly because of spring break and Easter break and all of that, but it'll be every other week. We've also started the office hours. So our first set of office hours was last Wednesday. And those were mostly libraries on the west side. And this week, tomorrow, there'll be libraries on the east side as well. That's all I have, unless you have any questions.
And I did not, my apologies, please, for trying to shorten the meeting. Blumenthal.
Just quickly, and you may not know 100%, but in terms of the attendees, have you noticed that they've been kind of representative of any sort of stakeholder group, like neighborhood associations or something like that, or just scattered?
There, it's a wide variety, but today there were stakeholders from different neighborhood organizations, and also on the West End, there's kind of more cohesive groups that represent several neighborhoods. So there were folks on there from on the call from there as well.
Okay, and I think that's great in the sense that I was hoping the neighborhood associations would show up the strongest, because in many cases they speak for, I mean, not in many cases, in theory, they should always speak for the neighborhood, right? And so when you have, whatever, thousands of people live in a certain neighborhood, at least if you get a representative slice of that, then that should still be impactful, right?
Mhm.
That's it for me.
Yeah, just as a reminder too, there is that Google sheet that has all the training times and days and meeting times and days, and I'll share that information with you as well.
Anything else for Kathy? No? Motion? You're awesome.
Motion to dismiss. Motion to close.
Second.
Motion by Walden, second by Winokur. All in favor, move your chair from the table. Thank you, everybody.